Hey everybody, Bearded Rogue here, and I'm going to warn you up front, there will be spoilers in this video for Netflix Stranger Things. If you have not seen Stranger Things, not only do I highly recommend that you go watch it, I recommend that you turn off this video and immediately go watch it. Once you've spent the next several hours of your life watching the entire series without taking breaks for eating or sleeping or various other things, you can come back to this video. But until you've done that, which you're going to want to, I recommend you shut the video off. So I'm going to give you a couple seconds. Alright, you've been warned. Spoilers abound from this point forward. So, Stranger Things, amazing. I think it may be the best TV I have seen in I don't even know how long. Like I struggle to think of other things to compare it to. It compares better with movies than it does with television, and yet it's a television series. Netflix kind of blurs the line there. The other Netflix series like Daredevil and Jessica Jones and House of Cards and all of that kind of skirt the line of being movies, especially in the way they're filmed. So there's something to be said that maybe this is a whole new medium and not really television at all, but classifying it as television, Stranger Things is phenomenal. It has the weird quirkiness of something like Fringe without being campy or goofy. It has the conspiracies of something like Millennium or the X-Files without being overwrought or without it being clear that they have no idea where they're going with anything. I think the writers have a very clear picture of at least the framework of what's behind everything. Like, I think they have more information than they've shared up to this point, as opposed to people, the writers of, say, Lost, who really had no idea what the actual answer was, and just kind of wrote as they went along, inventing things, rather than having an overall storyline or framework in mind when they started. I'm very confident that the Duffer Brothers actually have an idea of where they're going, and that makes this even more exciting, that there's probably going to be more of it. So, what do I say about it? I love almost everything about it, and especially the parts where it subverts what you expect. So it's obviously an homage to 80s cinema. It has a lot of David Lynch, a lot of John Carpenter, a lot of Steven Spielberg in it. The 80s is very much in its DNA. However, it doesn't play the 80s straight, and I think that makes me love it even more. Eleven's character has a lot in common with Charlie from Stephen King's Firestarter. The experiments on her parents, the psychic powers, the evil science organization, that sort of thing. But she's a very different character than Charlie. She's very much in control of herself. She's very much her own entity. And even in the scenes where she's still in captivity, she's still very much herself. Like, they can't make her do things that she doesn't want to do. She can assert her will. But this is who she knows. Like, this is her family, this is who raised her, this is who she grew up with. So she's still inclined to work with them, whether she agrees with what they want her to do or not. So as the series progresses, you find out, that originally they wanted her to be a weapon. She wasn't willing to be the kind of weapon they wanted. So instead they decided she was going to be used for remote viewing, which is a different kind of weapon, intelligence gathering. But that was something she was willing to do, even if it was scary. It was something that wasn't violating her personal principles, and so she was willing to go through with it. And so it was a negotiation between her and her captors instead of her just straight up being a slave. And eventually she makes her way out and goes on the run and, finds her love of Eggo waffles and a group of friends that treat her like a human being should be treated, rather than like a dangerous experiment or a valuable commodity. And it's an awesome storyline from her perspective. And then you have the boys, the four friends who she runs into. The child actors in this series are the best child actors I have ever seen. Ever. Period. Nobody even holds a candle. There's not a single moment where you believe that these people are not their characters. They don't step out of line, they don't go goofy, they don't get lost. Like, I don't know how they found so many child actors who were so in it and so amazing, but they really did. Like, whether it's Mike and his, earnest curiosity and his like young burgeoning love towards Eleven, or Dustin and his like caretaker mentality of everyone else and his love of food and his just warmth about his whole character, or Lucas and his fierce protective nature and his strong, warrior like tendencies that he inherited being the son of a veteran. Like, all of these things come into play, and all of their characters are so unique, but they're people that you can meet or will, growing up in a broken home with a single mother who's overworked and an older brother who doesn't quite know how to relate to people at all, let alone him, and being able to share things like music and Dungeons and Dragons and all of this stuff with his friends. Like, all of the characters, all of the boys are totally relatable characters. Like, they're kids I could have grown up with in the 80s. I was one of them in the 80s, like, that's how true to life it feels. And the actors give amazing performances. And then the next set of casts, the high school students, play off of all of the tropes of all of the 80s horror movies of, the kids irresponsibly sneaking off from their parents and drinking and doing, horrible things. But, like, they grow up really fast. Like, unlike in a lot of the 80s movies where they survive because they're pure, because they maintain some sort of moral character, like, they go a little bit off. Nancy, when Barb disappears, Nancy becomes like an agent of this creature's destruction. Like, she goes full bore, like, Hunter the Reckoning shit. Like, she's ready to saddle up with the Winchesters and go hunt ghosts and monsters. And it's a really awesome thing to see the actress go through this kind of a transformation where she's, the typical teenage girl who's, who cares about boys and her social standing and fights with her brother, and grows up really quickly once a situation that's serious presents itself. And she continues to care about Barb, poor tragic Barb, who's the only character that doesn't make it. Long after everybody else has forgotten her. Like, she's somebody who never gives up on Barb all the way until the end, and most of the other people don't even remember that Barb exists, which somehow makes it more tragic and makes it so that Nancy bearing this burden is even more of a thing. Or, they don't go the traditional route with her falling for Jonathan, the emo, creepy stalker boy. Jonathan's got his own host of problems, and there's a lot of Jonathan that I admire, but I'm so happy that he does not end up being her love interest in the end. Like, he's her partner in crime, he's her confidant, he's the person at her back who's defending her, but there's not romance there. Like, it doesn't just suddenly blossom out of nowhere, And her actual love interest, Steve, again, starts out as the typical, red-blooded American football-playing high school boy who's all about the conquest of these pretty girls and, hangs out with the douchebag crowd and everything. And he grows up over time. Like, he starts to realize that what he's doing is douchey. Like, there's some instances, like him destroying Jonathan's camera, that are almost excusable. Like, it's still shitty, but you can almost understand that here's this guy who's, like, taking pictures through their open windows of them in an intimate moment. Like, that's kind of creepy and skeevy. So you can almost understand where he's coming from, and when he chooses her and defending her over his friends and over his, social standing and all of that nonsense. Like, there's a part of me that actually cheered for him, even though he's the kind of guy that I wanted to, like, destroy in high school. I hated those people. But here's, like, a way that they flip that on its head and redeem this character. And from my understanding, like, he was supposed to just be the uber douche, but the actor did such a good job on set of conveying, like, this, conflict in himself that they decided to go a different direction. And so when he shows up and picks up a bat and, like, hauls off and hits this otherworldly monstrosity to defend Nancy, like, you really get that, like, yeah, he's a human, he's a douche, he's screwed up, but, like, there's genuinely somebody there. Like, there's not a single human in the series, except for maybe Will and Jonathan's dad, that's an irredeemable douchebag. Like, all of them have something to them. Even the creepy doctor that raised Eleven has a piece of him that is not irredeemable, not totally monstrous. Some of his actions are terrifyingly monstrous, but, like, even when he, you know, decides that, okay, we're not going to push her on this, we're not going to make her kill, we're going to find a different way to utilize her, there's almost this weird paternal thing going on where, you know, okay, I'm not going to break this way. And whether it's coming from a totally selfish place of we've poured all this money and this research into creating her, or there's actually some sort of paternal instinct there of, you know, okay, this is too much, we can't push her in this circumstance, we'll find another way. Like, every character in the story arc has something about them that is both dark on the upside down and light, you know? Like, Mike kind of rejoices in the bullies getting their comeuppance. And they're horrible people. But they're still just kids. Like, as illustrated by when Eleven finally, like, saves him and terrifies them. Like, they're just kids. They don't know any better. Like, I hate to make that excuse because when I was in junior high, I did not have the mindset that they were just kids. Like, they were horrible people, and they deserved every bad thing that happened to them. And had Eleven shown up in my life and given my bullies hell, I would have been rejoicing and cheering. But in that moment, I can empathize with them. I can get, like, where they're coming from. Their life isn't that great either, you know? They still live in a small town. There's still a pecking order. They still have to establish themselves. You know, all of the male macho posturing bullshit around homosexuality that existed in the 80s. And still, to some extent, to this day, though not as prevalent. Like, we've actually found a way to make it not cool to use words that disparage homosexuals as insults. Like, that's not okay anymore. Whereas in the 80s, they were the go-to words. As far as I can tell, mostly because it was no longer okay to use racist epithets. But it really captured that whole, like, macho posturing bullshit where they're just trying to protect their own space or their own masculinity, and they're just these young teenage boys who don't know any better. And so somebody shows them up and shows them how fucked up it is when you're exerting that level of power over someone else, and they kind of get it. I don't know, like, I could just go on and on and on about how much I love this series. You know, Chief Hopper being willing to play ball with the dark side in order to protect all of these kids or to save his community. Like, we don't know where he went in the car trip at the end. You know, we just know that he later on shows up placing out Eggos and supplies, ostensibly for 11, but who knows? You know, we know that he knows more than anybody else and that he's keeping it from them in the hopes that he can protect them all. And that's this burden that he, as this martyr-like character, is going to take on himself. You know, he's still paying for his own perceived sins and atonement for his daughter no longer being around. And, you know, it's... Every character is complex, every character is unique. They play with tropes like the, you know, Winona Ryder as the out of her mind with worry mother from every 80s movie, who totally subverts the tropes of every 80s movie and shows a will of steel and iron and a backbone and a fierceness that got lost in those things. Like, women were raging balls of hysteria in the 80s movies that they're referencing, but here's this woman who becomes hardened like iron by the experience and driven and focused and won't let anybody tell her she's crazy and doesn't care that everybody's trying, like, that thinks she's losing her mind. She does not care because her son means more to her than that. And she, you know, it's... I love this series. I love it. Like, I want to watch it over and over and over again. I want to share it with everybody I know. I want this to continue to be a thing. You know, one of the promotional items that I got at Origins was this Wasteland Express delivery service trucker hat. And Wasteland Express delivery service looks like an amazing game, but I was really skeptical on trucker hats as a promotional item. I was like, okay, it's different, it's unique, but is this really going to work? And then Stranger Things come out and Dustin wears a cap with exactly these colors. And now I want to wear this all the time, both because this game is amazing and because anything that lets me be more like Dustin in my life is something that I want to exist. It's that this series means that much. It captures what it's like to be in the 80s. What it was like growing up during that time period. Like, that's where I grew up. I went to kindergarten in 1985, like, this was a little bit earlier than my time, but it's a time period that I recognize, and, that alone makes it say something to me. But the fact that it captures the feeling of the media of the time and manages to modernize it and put its own unique twist on things makes it a masterpiece of television. Again, I could talk about Stranger Things all day long. I'm not going to do that. If you watched this whole rambling video, then there were spoilers galore. I hope that it didn't ruin anything for you, but I don't think even knowing how it turns out would ruin this series. I think it's that good of a series. But feel free to drop me a line, send me a tweet, message me on Facebook, however you want to get a hold of me. If you want to talk about Stranger Things, because I love this series and I think everybody needs to see it. And, yeah, that's about it. Stranger Things on Netflix, guys. Season 2, fingers crossed. Let's bring the cast back, or at least part of the cast, and see where the adventures in the Upside Down take them. At the very least, I want to know what happens with their D&D characters and the adventure that Mike has been putting together for his newly reformed group now that Will's back from the other side. Anyway, that's it for today. Stranger Things. Bearded Rogue out.